Have you ever noticed how food can take up an unreasonable amount of mental space? Not hunger, not cravings in the normal sense, but a constant background chatter. Thinking about your next meal while you're still eating the current one, planning snacks during a meeting, promising yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, only to feel pulled back into the same loop a few hours later. And the confusing part is this: it doesn't always match your body. You can be physically full and still mentally preoccupied with food. It's like your stomach has clocked out, but your brain stayed late. A lot of people assume this means a lack of discipline or emotional eating or some kind of moral failure around food. But psychologically, that explanation is way too shallow. What you're experiencing isn't a character flaw. It's something researchers and clinicians have started calling food noise. And understanding why it happens changes the entire conversation. Food noise isn't about liking food too much. It's about how your brain processes reward, scarcity, and safety. Your brain didn't evolve in a world where food was always available, hyper-palatable, and aggressively marketed. It evolved in a world where calories were uncertain and missing meals had real consequences. So one of your brain's core jobs became making sure you didn't forget to eat. That job lives in your reward system, specifically in the circuits that use dopamine. And here's where things get misunderstood. Dopamine doesn't mean pleasure, it means salience. It's the chemical that says, this matters. Pay attention. Don't forget this. When dopamine spikes, your brain leans forward. In some people, food cues trigger that system more intensely and more persistently, not because they're weak, but because their brains are more responsive to reward signals tied to survival. So food doesn't just register as nourishment. It registers as something urgent, something important, something that needs to stay top of mind. That's food noise. And once it starts, it doesn't sound loud. It sounds constant. Think about how hard it is to ignore a dripping faucet. One drop doesn't bother you, but when it never stops, your nervous system can't fully relax. Food noise works the same way. It's not a scream, it's a drip. Now, layer modern life on top of that wiring. Ultra-processed foods are engineered to hit multiple reward pathways at once: sugar, fat, salt, texture, novelty. Each bite delivers a tiny "this matters" signal, and your brain learns quickly. Add stress to the equation, and things get even louder. Stress increases cortisol, which makes your brain more vigilant. When your system feels strained, it starts looking for fast relief and reliable comfort. Food is predictable. Food works quickly. Food doesn't argue back. So during periods of emotional pressure, uncertainty, or exhaustion, food noise often gets worse, not because you're coping badly, but because your brain is trying to regulate itself. There's also a control element most people miss. When other areas of life feel unstable, work, relationships, finances, identity, food becomes something concrete. You can plan it, think about it, anticipate it. It gives your mind something it feels capable of managing. That's why food noise often spikes during transitions, new jobs, burnout, loneliness, big changes. Your brain grabs onto something familiar and controllable. And then there's the cultural layer. We live in a world that talks about food constantly while also moralizing it relentlessly. Eat this, don't eat that. Enjoy, but not too much. Be indulgent, but also disciplined. Your brain is swimming in mixed signals, so it keeps monitoring, checking, negotiating, planning, replanning noise. Here's where an important distinction comes in. Food noise is not the same as hunger. Hunger is a body signal. Food noise is a cognitive loop. And loops are powerful because they stay open. Psychologists talk about the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency for unfinished business to linger in your mind. When your brain never feels fully resolved around food, never sure it's safe, enough, or allowed, the loop stays open. So your mind keeps checking back in. Are we good now? What about later? Just in case. Now, recently, this idea entered mainstream conversation when people started talking openly about medications that reduce food noise, and that sparked a lot of strong reactions. Some people felt relief, others felt threatened. Because if food noise isn't about willpower, then a lot of old narratives fall apart. But regardless of how you feel about treatments, the psychological insight is important. When food noise quiets, people often describe an unexpected sense of mental space, not euphoria, quiet. And that tells us something crucial. The noise wasn't desire, it was vigilance. Your brain wasn't chasing pleasure, it was scanning for reassurance. Now let's pause for a second. If you're listening to this and thinking, oh wow, that explains a lot, this is exactly the kind of thing we explore here. We take behaviors people judge themselves for and explain what's actually happening underneath. If that resonates with you, go ahead and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it keeps these conversations going. Now back to the psychology. Another factor that amplifies food noise is restriction, especially mental restriction. When food is labeled as forbidden, your brain treats it as scarce, and scarcity supercharges attention. Even thinking I shouldn't can make the loop louder. This is why rigid dieting often backfires psychologically. The brain doesn't hear discipline, it hears threat, and threats don't quiet the reward system, they activate it. Over time, this can create a cycle where the harder you try to suppress food thoughts, the more persistent they become. Not because you're failing, but because your brain is doing what it always does with perceived scarcity. So what actually helps? The goal isn't to silence your brain, it's to reassure it. Food noise quiets when your nervous system believes three things: food is available, food is allowed, and you're safe. That doesn't mean unlimited indulgence. It means predictability, structure without punishment, signals that the loop can close. It also means addressing the things food noise is standing in for: rest, emotional regulation, meaningful reward that isn't edible. And perhaps most importantly, it means dropping the shame. Because shame keeps the system on high alert. When you judge yourself for food noise, your brain reads that as more danger, more uncertainty, more need to monitor. Understanding turns the volume down. Here's the reframe I want you to keep. If you experience food noise, your brain isn't broken. It's vigilant in a world that constantly presses its buttons. It's trying to protect you using tools that once made perfect sense. Learning to work with that system instead of fighting it, this is where real change starts. So, I'm curious, if you've noticed food noise in your own life, when does it get louder? Stress, fatigue, transitions? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more pop psychology like this, like explaining the quiet patterns that shape everyday behavior, make sure you're subscribed. We'll keep exploring how the modern brain navigates a world it was never designed for, one mental habit at a time.